We all have biases, opinions, beliefs, and convictions about what's morally right and wrong. Sometimes these convictions are so strong that we actively engage in public conduct that's intended to establish our convictions as the acceptable behavior of society. For some, these convictions may lead to an advocacy for affordable housing. For others, they may relate to reproductive issues. For others, it might be about immigration or racism or fiscal policy. Whatever it is, if we have any self-awareness, we acknowledge that our underlying beliefs guide our lives and shape our interactions with the world around us. It's nothing new. It's part of our humanity. It's how we were created. And it's been part of Christian dialogue from the founding of the church. One of the most contentious times within the life of the church was certainly the Reformation. Christians burned at the stake other Christians over issues of access to the Bible, the role of clergy, and the source of authority. It's of that era of Christians fighting Christians that we first find the saying, in essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, in all things charity. Sometimes that phrase has been attributed to John Wesley, but we know the quote predates him, though no one knows for sure who said it first. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity. In other words, some things are so important that we have to find a way to agree on them. On other things, we can agree to disagree. But in everything, we need to treat one another with love. And that's really our struggle today, isn't it? I don't have to tell you that in today's polarized society, the predominant attitude is that the opposition is evil, that the other side is ruining America, that if you vote for the wrong presidential candidate, you are my enemy, or at least you can no longer be my friend. As a society, we've given up on the idea in all things charity, in all things love. And that means, whether we will admit it or not, we've given up on Jesus. Because at the core of Jesus' message is love. 2 weeks ago, we began the all-church study, Reckless Love, Jesus' call to love our neighbor. We're using the book by Bishop Tom Berlin for our all-church Lenten study. In the book, Berlin turns our normal assumptions about loving God and loving neighbor upside down. He says, while it's true that the more we love God, the more we can love our neighbors, it's when we learn to love our neighbor that we really grow in love with God. Berlin says, it's only when we commit to love our neighbor and intentionally accomplish this goal that we will learn what it means to fully love God. In other words, we can't claim to love God if we aren't committed to intentionally loving our neighbors. But in our gospel lesson today, Jesus says, even that is not enough. In Luke chapter 6, we have what Luke calls the Sermon on the Plain. Matthew more popularly calls it the Sermon on the Mount. Either way, what the gospel writers have compiled in this sermon is a summary of Jesus' teaching. Berlin calls it an orientation lecture for Jesus' newly recruited disciples. In this sermon, Jesus defines the norms of conduct for those who would identify as children of God. And the most common topic in this sermon is love. We've already looked at Jesus' command to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. But in this passage, Jesus raises the bar. He says it's not enough to love your neighbor. Here, Jesus said, you must love your enemy. Let's take a look at just a few verses from this sermon, recorded in Luke chapter 6, verses 31 to 36. Would you read with me? Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Love your enemies, and you will be children of the Most High God. Be merciful, just as God is merciful. Be like God. As Berlin points out in the book, we live in a time when love sometimes feels like it's in limited supply. He goes on to suggest that there are those among us who want to unleash an avalanche of hate. Today in America, there is an entire industry designed to promote outrage and to set Americans against each other, creating a culture of contempt. But Jesus says if we're going to follow him, we have to learn to be the most loving people on the planet. If we give up on love, we've given up on Jesus. Jesus calls us as his followers to grow our capacity to love to such an extent that there is no room left in our lives for anger or contempt or hate. But how do we do that? How do we move from hate to love? How do we change from contempt to mercy? Well, there's an old story out of the Native American tradition. It's one of my favorites, and you've heard me tell the story before, but it's worth repeating. It's the story of the two wolves. You see, an old Cherokee chief was teaching his grandson about life. And he told the young boy, "A fight is going on inside me. A fight between two wolves. The dark wolf is filled with anger, greed, arrogance, lies, and hate. But the light wolf is filled with love, peace, hope, truth, and kindness. The same fight is going on inside you, grandson. and inside of every person on the face of the earth. The grandson pondered this for a moment and then asked, "Grandfather, which wolf will win?" The old chief looked at his grandson in the eye and simply said, "The one you feed." Every day we make choices, important choices that could be looked at as being trivial. But these choices define us. Every day we decide to respond either in love or contempt. Every day we decide to react in mercy or judgment. Every day we decide between criticism or kindness. Every day we decide which wolf to feed. It's so much easier to feed the dark wolf, to complain, to hold on to bitterness, to act the victim, to nurse our wounds. There's virtually no effort required to do these things. And you get the false satisfaction of feeling superior over those who have hurt you. The light wolf is different. It's harder to feed. Choosing love is challenging. It requires vulnerability and can be painful. But in the end, love is the way of Jesus. Love is the core of the good news. Love is the only thing strong enough to conquer hate. Love is the reason God refuses to give up on us. And love changes people. If you've ever tried to argue your way into converting a wrong-minded individual, you know the frustration and feeling of failure when the other continues to make choices you view as unhealthy or even immoral. Few people are ever converted through argument. Most people respond a lot better to acceptance and understanding than they do from advice or argument. What the world needs now is more listening, more openness, more focus on what we all have in common. What the world needs less of is anger, division, and self-righteousness. Love God. Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. And you will be children of the Most High God.